Welcome to the MorningStretch.tv. I'm your host, Tony Herbert, and we're here in the BX. Get up that X, y'all. And we're here at the Bronxborough President's office to have a conversation with Bronxborough President Ruben Diaz Jr. I'll meet you upstairs. Let's have a conversation. First, let me just say thank you for the opportunity. I mean, I have the utmost respect for you. We've done a lot of good stuff. It's not one time that I've not walked in this office and you haven't done what you said you were going to do, particularly with our youth step competition and other things that we've done out here. So I commend you on that as being one of those leaders that everybody can say that they can believe what he says. And I will help transcribe that. What got you into politics? I mean, what was it that made you say, this is what I want to do?
Well, first of all, let me just congratulate you and receiving a compliment from Tony Herbert, that's huge, man. The viewers need to know that you don't give those freely.
Right.
And as a borough president, working with you, whether it's doing recreational things, the step challenge with the kids, right, or more serious issues, the gun violence and all that. Yes. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
I appreciate that.
To work with you, and so I'm so happy to be with you, and my house is your house. Mi casa es tu casa.
I appreciate that. and now,
so what got me involved in politics?
What got you in it?
Look, my parents come from Puerto Rico. They met each other here in Manhattan. My father came from Puerto Rico to Brooklyn after serving in the Army, and my mother with her family, they came to the upper Manhattan.
Okay.
They met when they worked in factories on 26th Street. They started a family, fell in love, started a family, moved to the Bronx. And my father had odd jobs here and there. Okay. He started working in at a senior citizen center under a gentleman by the name of Bernie Lopez. Mm-hmm. And one thing led to the other. He grew. The city in the late 1970s was able to elect a new mayor, Ed Koch. Mm-hmm. And the senior center that he worked for was defunct and it went out of business. And he got a couple of young folks together and they worked on a proposal to start a new senior citizen program. Mm. That winded up growing very quickly. From 1977 to 1980, my father grew in influence and in services with the senior program. And so my introduction to politics was in 1980, just 3.5 years after he was able to receive his first contract with the city and was working with the seniors. He ran for the state senate against the late great Joseph Gallagher.
I heard that name.
Yeah. Who was the Maximus black leader right here in the borough of the Bronx and one of the top black leaders in the city of New York, certainly in the state senate. My father was bold enough to run against him, and I was a 7-year-old, Tony, licking envelopes, knocking on doors, and gluing posters up. So that was my introduction. Oh. 7 years old, 1980, my father ran against Joseph Gallagher.
So was it his nudge that pushed you into politics? The fact that he became that particular individual?
I don't know if he nudged me, but like anything else, we're influenced by our surroundings, by adults, and it begins at home, it begins with family.
Right.
So my brother, sister, and I'm the youngest of three, my brother, sister, and I, we were always exposed to civic responsibility, civic duty, giving back to the community, serving our seniors' lunches. I used to deliver Meals on Wheels lunches. And so whether it was that first run that he did or every year subsequent to that, we helped out somebody in Bronx politics as a family, as an organization, to run for office.
Right. Fast
forward now, in 1994, here he is, we're putting a slate together, and I still live in Soundview, but at the time the district was the 75th Assembly District, and he didn't have anybody running against the male district leader, which is the party position, just in case the viewers don't know. So I said, you know what? I was 21 years old. I had went to my father, let's keep it real. I went to my father to ask him for $20 so I could buy diapers. So that at the time, I'm young husband, young father, used to work at Farberware, and I was living check to check. So I'm like, let me stop by, borrow some money, pay him the next paycheck, and here he is having this confab. So I was like, why don't you put me in so I could run, because you don't have young representation in your slate, and certainly the establishment at the time was not of elected officials that spoke to young folks.
Gotcha.
So I thought I could provide that. And so my technical entrance into politics, and I ran against a guy who was there for 23 years as a district leader. I was 21 years of age, was when I ran for the district leadership back in 1994.
So, I mean, now hearing this, and I've met your father. I've actually worked with him, and we dealt with some issues out in Staten Island when he was out there marching against, blacks and Hispanics fighting over, stupidity, and we stood together out there. He has a larger than life personality. I mean, he's famous in the Bronx. How do you fall into that? Is there a shadow there, or is there something you just want to emulate?
Well, initially, there's no denying that he introduced me. And by the way, a lot of people, he's divorced from my mom, but a lot of folks don't realize that my mom is very political as well.
Oh, okay.
In fact, the family, we have late lunches every Sunday in my mom's house. And a lot of political conversations and a lot of political strategizing happens in mommy's living room. So shout out to mommy, right? But initially growing up, I'm known as Rubencito, Little Ruben. A lot of folks knew me through my dad.
Yeah.
But we're the anomaly in the state of New York, I believe, in the history of the state of New York, where traditionally when you see parents and their sons or daughters who go into politics, usually the parent gets elected first.
Right.
Well, even though I'm Ruben Diaz Jr., I am the senior elected official in the House. I was elected 5 years before my father was. So he introduced me to public service, to civic responsibility. Right. I won that district leadership race before he was ever elected. I lost my first race in 1996 in a special election for the Assembly, but then I won during that year's primary.
Okay.
And it wasn't until 2001, after I was already elected 5 years, that my father ran for the city council in the same area, and I helped him out.
Oh, okay. So he was in city council before?
He was city council for 1 year.
Okay, and then went to
the
Senate.
city and the state senator. It's amazing how history has a funny way of repeating itself.
Right.
The state senator in the Bronx at the time, who was a Democrat, abandoned the Democratic Party and switched party positions and sat with the Republicans. So we were trying to figure out, how do we deal with that? So we were able to get Councilman Ruben Diaz Sr. to run against that state senator. And then he was up in the state senate for 15 years.
Wow.
Now he's back in the city council.
Now, you served as an assemblyman
Yeah.
and then transitioned to the Bronx. Why?
The assembly was a wonderful career for me.
Right.
I was up there for 7 terms, almost 13 years, 12 and a half years. Cut my bones around police brutality,
Right.
Amadou Diallo.
Well, you had a number. You had healthcare.
Healthcare,
I mean,
the
legislation
environment.
you pushed on a lot
Yeah,
of
we
sides.
did. We did a lot of great work up there. But I always wanted to serve a broader community, and I always, I guess, sort of like you,
What, radical? No, right.
we want to effectuate change as quickly as possible.
right.
When you're in the legislature, you have to depend on 149 other assembly members, 63 state senators, and then you got to try to get the governor to sign whatever bill you have into law or whatever, work something into the budget. I felt that once Barack Obama became the president of the United States, he tapped the former borough president to go to DC with him. There was a vacancy. I thought that was a perfect opportunity for me to be able to serve the broader community of the Bronx.
Right.
And to do so at an executive level, having all the relationships, having the knowledge of how Albany works, how the city works. I thought that we can provide a new leadership to bring resources to the Bronx.
Now, we spoke about it. You dealt with health care. You dealt with the minimum wage and overtime. You dealt with housing and tenant rights and insurance fraud. And we also talked about you dealing with the issue of gun violence and gang violence in the Bronx. How does that transition and all of that stuff, do you still apply that as a major concern as the borough president coming from the assembly?
You know, these are a lot of things that I've faced in one way, shape, or form my whole life.
Right.
From being a young husband, a teenage father, a college student that had to provide for his family and had to decide whether I should buy books or put off the rent. These are all things that I've had to deal with. So it's all interrelated for me, whether it's my personal life, my personal experiences, being up in Albany, in the borough of the Bronx, experiencing all the things that we went through. So Yeah, very early on, we hit the ground running. We in the last 9 years, Tony, we've seen 15.5 billion private dollars invested in our borough.
Right.
We've cut unemployment by more than half, from 14% to 5.8%, putting almost 120,000 more Bronxites to work today than the first day that I took office. Working with organizations, with advocates and activists such as yourself, reducing crime to a point where the Bronx is the safest Bronx that the world has seen since 1951. We have been able to provide housing, all kind of housing, over 36,000 units over the last 9 years. I remember what it was like struggling to pay the rent on 156th Street and Fox Street, right? Championing higher wages, especially making sure that we create jobs for those who are coming out of the CUNY system. I'm a CUNY twofer, so they could have light at the end of the tunnel. So it's all interrelated for me, we're going to continue to not only build a better Bronx, but I think that whatever is good for the Bronx has to be good for the rest of the city of New York.
Now, you've outlined that. Would you say that some of the unique challenges coming into the borough presidency out of Albany, the stuff that you've laid out?
What are some of the unique challenges? I don't know if it's unique. Yeah, I guess it was unique because other boroughs weren't always treated like the Bronx.
Right.
So the challenges for us were to get over the hurdle of turmoil, political turmoil in our borough, negative stereotypes, perceptions of our borough. I mean, for all intents and purposes, we were the forgotten ones. Regardless of who was in Albany, regardless of political parties or ideological persuasions, people just stayed away from the Bronx. So as an assembly member and now as the borough president, and working with the current leadership of the legislature and in Albany, I think we've been able to do that and bring in more resources. So now when you look at the Bronx, whether it's housing, economic development, job creation, crime reduction, education resources, all of these things are now coming because of the relationships that we have and staying true to our initial mission, which is, Carl Heastie, the speaker, and I, as young guys here in the Bronx, young elected officials, we always said, that we were tired of being in first place in everything that's bad and last place in everything that's good, and that whenever it was our turn, we were going to stay true to that mission. And so now we're making sure that all of those resources, all of the pillars of hope and opportunity that New Yorkers, that Bronxites always had, we've been addressing them.
How does the advent of gentrification affect you here in the Bronx?
It weighs on me every single day. And we learn from other boroughs.
Right.
It's a complex issue. And so you have to bear with me because I get a little long-winded when it comes to gentrification and displacement. I hope that my concern is that when people use gentrification, just like other things, I hope that I get concerned when people use it loosely. Gentrification is about making sure that you uplift the community with the people who live there. Some people use it because they feel like when other communities come in, some people use it, against other racial groups. We have to be careful with that. With that said, we know that life around us in the city of New York is becoming more and more expensive. And we have to do everything that we can to make sure that Bronxites and New Yorkers are able to live here. And there's no silver bullet to that.
Right.
There's a number of things you have to do. You have to make sure that the state legislature in Albany continues to have rent-regulated laws, strengthen those. I'm a Democrat. I don't want to get too political, but that's the reason why we need a change in leadership in the Senate, because it'll make it a whole lot easier. Number two, you have to create jobs with salaries. A great deal of what's going on here is that the salaries of New Yorkers are not keeping up to speed with the expenses of New York, namely rents. So that's the reason why we push for the increase in minimum wage.
Right.
It's the reason why we've been the champions and we were the catalyst for having a living wage in the city of New York. We have to protect tenants now. We just did a rezoning at the Jerome corridor, where we have what's called a certificate of no harassment. It's sort of like a letter grade when you go to restaurants,
Right.
but for property owners. So if you want to expand, if you want to build on your property, if you want some type of permit in the city of New York, you have to have this certificate of no harassment, meaning that you have a clean bill of health from your tenants that you haven't been harassing them, or else you can't move forward with trying to, do something with your property. Right to counsel, we were part of that, where many of the New Yorkers don't have the legal representation to match up with those landlords who are taking them to housing court. Now, if you make under a certain salary, you have free legal representation in housing court. So we were very much a part of that. Now, with all of that said, I don't want to get too technical here, whenever you do housing, I just told you we did 36,000 units.
Right.
You have to have diversity in income bands. The AMI, the area medium income, if you would allow me for a minute.
That 36,000 is not made up under the mayor's plan where he said that he was going to build that stuff. Is that
Some of it is.
Okay.
A lot of it is.
Okay.
But we 36,000 since I've been the borough president, so a lot of that was also Bloomberg.
Okay.
A lot of that has been us working with private developers, and a lot of it has come from HCR. Since I've been the borough president, $950 million of state housing, the HCR.
HCR is the Department of
Is the
Housing.
Housing and Community Renewal of the
Okay.
state of New York. So
Right.
this is like the governor's housing agency, and we've been able to get $950 million into housing here. So it's a smorgasbord. There's a lot going on. But when you do that, you have to ensure that you have diversity. What do I mean by that? The area median income for a family of four is $90,000. In other words, I have a family of four, my wife, my two sons. Any family of four with an aggregate salary of $90,000 or that's the median income. So if you do a building across the street and it's 100% of the AMI, I hate to get too technical.
No. I mean, this is good.
But this is
we
something.
educate our viewers, so.
Yeah, because a lot of your viewers, they always say, well, what's affordable? How do you define affordable? What does that mean, affordable housing? To the viewers, affordable housing is this concept that no matter what salary you make, you should not be paying more than 30% of your income.
Right.
Anything more than that puts a strain on your well-being, puts a strain on what is it that else you could provide for your family, no vacations, clothing, food, so on and so forth. So there's this housing program. It's called affordable housing. With affordable housing, if you build a building at 100% of AMI, it means that apartment there for a family of four you can't make more than $90,000 a year or more.
Right.
So if you have a apartment across the street at 50% of the AMI, it means that if you make $45,000 a year or more, then you don't qualify because you make too much money. Well, what happens in our communities when you have a black, a Latino, or a black and Latino couple come together, and one is a bus driver, one is a correction officer. The correction officer alone is making over $45,000 a year. Now we're telling them you're making too much money to live in your community. So this is the reason why we, even though people are saying we need low income bands, I think that we have to run the gamut and be strategic and creative and have a diversity so that we could also retain our professional workforce.
Now, according to the last census in 2010, the South Bronx was considered the poorest district in the nation, or borough, and whatnot. That's a federal census. 38% live at or below the poverty line. How do you address the systemic problems associated with this level of poverty?
So just correction, it used to be the poorest congressional district. But the congressional district has changed. So we're no longer that, but it takes nothing away from the fact that we're not perfect.
Right.
That we still have a large segment of our population that's poverty. How do we do that? We have to continue to work with the private industry. So for instance, I have something called the PIC.
Okay.
The PIC is the Private Industry Council, where all of these folks from the markets, all of the major institutions like the zoo, like the Botanical Garden, we put them all in one room. We work with a program called Here to Here. And it's funded by Judy and Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan Chase. Okay. And a lot of our kids, they don't have the ability to do summer youth jobs. So what we do is to tell these folks, we'll train the kids specifically to the skills that you're looking for, but we want you to give them an apprenticeship, a paid apprenticeship, for 6 to 8 weeks during the summer months, with the mentality that what you're doing is that now you're training, you have a farm system for your own corporation. We need to do more of that. We need to do more, and we've been doing more coding in our school system and programming, gearing our kids to make sure that they have the skill set for the current economy and the future economy. We've been, again, fighting to increase wages, whether it's having union and organized labor. You know, the quickest way to get out of poverty is to have a union job. So where we can, we are working with the unions, making sure that there's apprenticeship. Whenever there's development, making sure that they accommodate our unions here. Again, life isn't perfect, but those are the things that we have to do. We also have to find jobs for those individuals who are in higher ed, in our CUNY system, and adults. And we've been doing that. Again, over 120,000 more Bronxites are working today than the first day I took office, and we're fighting for higher wages, minimum wage increase, living wage, union, prevailing wage. These are all the things that we have to do here. A lot of the folks that are not working are also for health reasons. So that's the one area that we've been addressing. Health is a big issue here. And before we can have any citizen work and be a productive member of society, we have to make sure that they are living a healthier lifestyle. So before we even get to training with a lot of folks, we're working to make sure that we combat diabetes, respiratory ailments, heart condition, all of these things, and working with our major healthcare institutions.
Now, let's transition that conversation about poverty into the homelessness aspect as well. New York One reported in February 2017 that the Bronx was number 2 in the city with the number of homeless shelters. I know that to be kind of true because Brooklyn follows right behind immediately. With that in mind, do you feel your constituents are receiving the level of funding required to get them out of that homeless situation?
Another complex issue. Over 62,000 people every single night in the homeless shelter system. 25,000 are children. I don't think that the city of New York does a good enough job. And we've been working with Steve Banks to put the real face of homelessness. Now, I'm gonna get controversial here, especially in our communities, in many of our communities. You can't go to a house of worship on the weekend and say we are all children of God. You can't say I'm my brother and my sister's keeper on a Saturday or Sunday, and then on Wednesday go to the community board and say, I don't want them living nowhere near me. And so do we need more resources? Absolutely. The problem is that in the past, what we've tend to see is many shelters go up without the consideration of the planning strategies of the community. So they're being superimposed. And also, you get a lot of communities where there's an oversaturation. There has to be equity here.
But we got people like Scott Stringer basically saying, along with Council Speaker Corey Johnson, saying that spending is off the chain, what have you. And should we dial back by putting the homeless situation and what's going on in DHS on watch? So are they pulling back from supporting this?
I hope not. I think that what they're saying is that we have to be more efficient in how we spend the money. So I believe that the solution is permanent supportive housing. But what your viewers, and I was trying to get to this, what your viewers need to realize, the real face of homelessness in the city of New York is not the individual you see laying in the subway on the street. That's a fraction. That's what you call the street homeless. When we talk about the 60-some-odd thousand individuals, what we're saying is 25,000 are children. The rest are adults. More than half of those adults, Tony, have a job. So what we have to do is that we have to continue to work with programs like LINK and FEPS and continue to incentivize and work with our landlords.
Some of the funding pulled back from some of those programs?
From the state. Okay. So you had the Advantage program that was done away with a number of years ago. Now the city has LINK. We have to make sure that a lot of more of those, the landlords and developers accept those, that we have carve-outs, and you also have FEPs. So that the families, going back to the whole affordable housing, those families that work, they can't afford the rent based on their salary. Once you have those programs, they will only pay 30% of their salaries, and then these programs will then take care of that gap for the rest of the rent. Remember that what we're speaking of here are either single mothers for the most part, or families that are in the system with babies.
Right.
And we
Was it like 23,000
like 24 to 25,000 children
are in the homeless shelter?
on the homeless shelter. So we need to dial back. A lot of times you hear this vilification, this invective that's coming out, especially when folks are speaking of sightings in their communities. You know, there's a misconception. The homeless population on a nightly basis, they're not criminals, they're not pedophiles,
Right.
they're not drug addicts. These are working adults for the most part and children, and we need to accommodate them.
Let's talk a little bit now about, I saw you in the news recently with Arlene Parks, the CEO of, and Vice Chair of Diego Beekman Mutual Housing, and the issue of bringing a jail to the Bronx and that particular tow pound site. What's your position there? I know that you were in support of what the community is saying, but what's your overall position?
So growing up the way that I did with some of the fellas and family members, visiting Rikers Island, being a member of the corrections committee, and perhaps some of my friends in COBA don't agree with my stance. I believe that ultimately we should close down Rikers Island. I think that ultimately we need to have a paradigm where jailing is done differently. I think we have to have a situation where it's safe for the faculty, for corrections officers. There's technology. I think that we have to have it more conducive for family members to visit those that are detained. And we have to create more safety and a conducive learning environment so that those that are detained can go and better themselves. With that said, there's so many boxes that we still have to check. So I don't understand the haste. For instance, I am all for alternative to incarceration for those who have mental health issues. Too many of them are on Rikers Island, and we find out too late. I believe we should have bail reform, which disproportionately attacks Black and Latino men in particular. To have one community be able to walk out and go back home simply because they could pay bail for the same crime that they committed when, you know, and somebody else having to go into jail. I think that's a tremendous injustice. I believe that we need to raise the age, and we've done that.
Right.
16 and 17-year-olds. And in fact, the Bronx is accommodating a lot of 16 and 17-year-olds at Horizon.
Right.
So all of these things we have to see, and how is it that we reduce the population on Rikers Island? Once upon a time, the population was north of 20,000. Now we're south of 10,000. Hopefully we can get somewhere to 5,000. When the mayor, what he did was something that was totally disrespectful at the time, with no consultation with anybody from the Bronx. And basically they said, well, we own, you know, the EDC, we own this parcel of land. By the way, they've been using it as a tow pound for decades. That used to be the site of the old Lincoln Hospital.
Right.
And we've been building up that entire community. More Mott Haven, more Port Morris. And if you ever read a book called The Wild Cowboys, you would know what Diego Beekman was like. Not only did the folks from Diego Beekman, Arlene Parks and others, not only did they survive the 80s and the 90s and what we know was depicted in The Wild Cowboys, but now they have bettered their neighborhood. This is the 4-0 precinct, Tony.
Yeah.
The 4-0 precinct in 1990, when I was a teenager, had 72 homicides in 1 year. The entire Bronx last year had 72 homicides. Last year, the 4-0 precinct had 3 homicides. And that's because of the work that community leaders, we give credit to the NYPD, have done there. But not only that, they've taken it a step further. They actually have a plan, an economic development plan for residents, commercial space, job creation, recreational activities for that site. This is a plan for the community, by the community, something that we've all been talking about for so many years. And here comes the mayor now, without any consultation, saying, we want that location, knowing fully well that there was a plan by the community there. He presented it as it was a fait accompli, and we're just not going to stand for it.
Okay. Now, the mayor recently said he didn't have enough money to fix NYCHA. Now, I know you've been out on the forefront, with working with a lot of the NYCHA leadership here. Note meaning money to fully fund summer youth programs, or anything along that line. They pulled a lot of that stuff out of the developments. What's your position with regards to where NYCHA is right now and what needs to be done?
The conditions in NYCHA are deplorable.
Extremely.
This comes from somebody who was born in public housing. I was born in more houses. Somebody who still has family in public housing. Someone who has a brother who works for public housing. He's a supervisor in the Bronx. And NYCHA needs billions and billions of dollars, over $20 billion to make it right. So we need the federal government, we need the city and the state to also do their part. No one should be living in those conditions. You would not live in those conditions. I would not live in those conditions. And any landlord, any private landlord that we knew or we know of who has the same conditions for their tenants, we will all be out there protesting. And yet here you have public housing, the Public Housing Authority, having people living with roaches, with walls that are exposed, pipes that are exposed.
Bed bugs.
I mean, the list goes on and on. With that said, I'm not certain that under the current leadership, and I know that the chairwoman is no longer there,
right.
But under the current system, I'm not certain yet. It hasn't been proven yet. Hopefully, they'll prove me wrong. That the capacity is there. That even if we gave more funding to NYCHA, that they can use that and create better conditions. What do I mean by that? We need more funding, yes. But even when we've had funding, like the funding for Patterson House's boilers,
right.
They've been fully funded since 2011. Fully funded. Fast forward 7 years later, till this day, they still haven't even gone through the RFP process. So even when we fully fund something, even when the money is there, there seems to be this either ineptitude or this glacial pace to make things happen. That is the reason why I was at the forefront of calling for an emergency declaration, and I'm happy that the state legislature and the governor heard us out, and that's what we have now. Hopefully that will expedite the procurement process, and hopefully it will now allow for NYCHA and the city of New York to have the capacity to make things happen, whether it's roofs, boilers, or repairs to apartments.
Now you have the quote-unquote HUD secretary saying that they want to triple the rents for those that live in public housing. Culminate that with the thought process, too, that there is also programs in NYCHA, federal programs, that are not in compliance based on this mayor and his inactivity with regards to reaching out to the folks that live there, Section 3. So I asked the question, what can be done now and what have you? Let's say Ruben Diaz Jr. is the mayor right now. What would you do to ensure that, one, the NYCHA developments are in compliance, or NYCHA, and or that there's an opportunity to dial back, pushing people out of housing, trying to charge them that extra money?
Well, first of all, Dr. Carson
It's a nut job.
must be out of his mind. And I mean, he's supposed to be a brain surgeon.
Yeah.
Once upon a time, we said, it doesn't take a brain surgeon.
Exactly, exactly.
In this case, wow, I mean, look, I would trust him. I probably would trust him to perform brain surgery on me. But obviously, he's out of his element as HUD secretary. To say that you're going to triple, I mean, what world is he living in? When maybe you need a rocket scientist instead of a brain surgeon to run NYCHA. I don't know. So I totally disagree with his assessment. As mayor of the city of New York, the first thing you have to do is be in compliance, just on lead paint inspections.
Right.
That alone goes a long way. We know that the city of New York was caught out there lying about being in compliance when they had the hearings in the city council. I think that there are so many things that the city of New York can do, working with other agencies, working, bringing in, whether they're carpenters, plumbers, painters from other agencies to come in and simply just take care of the pink slips. When it's all said and done, I think that programs like the RAD program, where you have some developers coming in, not only doing the work, but also then managing some of these sites without increasing the rents to the NYCHA development is something that has been working here in the Bronx and other parts of the city. But ultimately what we're gonna need is somebody who's different in the White House and a different Congress. NYCHA, with all of the frustrations, with all the criticisms that I can say, and have about NYCHA, and not until the federal government comes in a big way will we be able to fix NYCHA to the point that it needs.
I'm gonna follow up the thought process about this.
And as mayor of the city of New York, that's one of the things I would be, present and vocal about DC doing what they need to do to provide people with decent public housing.
So let's stay on that note as mayor. Now you're seen as one of the rising stars here in this state, particularly on the political scene, quite frankly. A lot of people have the utmost respect for a lot of the stuff that you do in your community engagement and involvement. Now during the last mayoral race, many people were looking for you to throw your hat in. You pulled out. Why was that?
Well, I didn't pull out. I was never in. We looked at it, and ultimately I decided that, A, we need to keep unity in the Democratic Party in the city of New York, and B, I really like my job. And it was going to be an uphill battle, quite frankly, to primary an incumbent mayor, one where he enjoyed great support in parts of the Bronx, and particularly in the Black and the Latino community. Labor support. It would have been putting a lot of my friends in a very tough situation. It would have been an uphill battle, but also I had so many different things to finish. We're still working on so many different things, that like making sure we have a new pavilion in Orchard Beach, 4 Metro North stations that are fully funded, not fully funded, but just about, they should be fully funded soon. I got to ensure that. Waterfront development. The Kingsbridge National Ice Center. There were just so many things that I needed to finish here.
I got 2 more questions for you. How important, this might be an easy one for you, how is it important for the next mayor of New York City to be a Yankee fan?
The most important thing. The most important thing, because for the last 2 mayoralties we've had, think about that. Can a Yankee fan run and win the mayoralty in Boston?
No.
But we have 2 Boston Red Sox fans, the last 2 mayors.
Last 20 years.
Yeah, we have to change that.
Yeah, that's that dichotomy, man. We have to break that streak.
Go Yankees.
I guess my second question would be, what's in the cards for you now? I mean, there's talk now, even now, that given what's happening in Albany with regards to the Attorney General's race and the probability that Tish James is going to go forward and run for that particular seat, that means she gets out of the way, should she get elected, out of the way in the mayoralty, which kind of opens up a door for you and whatnot. Now, there's 2 components tied to that. One, they're saying either you're going to run for public advocate or you're going to run for mayor. What would be the skinny on that?
In 2021, I will be 48 years old. I elected 26 years of my life. I believe that we've pushed the envelope on all of the different areas that are of concern to the citizens of the city of New York. We have a strong personal narrative. We have a strong narrative coming out of the Bronx. And again, what's good for the Bronx has to be good for the city. Right. My heart is in running for mayor.
Okay.
At this moment, I have no interest in running for public advocate. One never knows. I mean, Tish James 2 weeks ago didn't know that she was going to be
running for AG.
Running for AG. If I had to bet on it tonight, if I had to make a decision tonight, Tony, I wouldn't run for public advocate. Again, I still have.
Go ahead. That's somebody calling. That's probably Tish.
I have still so many things that we want to finish out here, if I'm going to stay in government, the only office that is of interest to me is being mayor of the city of New York.
Well, you have a lot of support in that atmosphere and whatnot, you know, strongly from this particular individual. So no matter what you do, you got my support.
I appreciate it.
Anything you want to add? I mean, we've talked about your political. We've talked about, you know, Ruben Diaz, the family man and whatnot. And I think, well, let's do this. I'd really like to get that information you shared earlier, talking about the success of your kid and whatnot, graduating and now going on to service in the military and all that stuff. That's the stuff that we like to know about, because that makes that. That's
a lot of
what
people
makes you
don't know
up.
that about me. A lot of people think that, I mean, because I'm not out there with my family,
Right.
a lot of folks don't realize that I have two grown men. I started at a young age as a father. Hilda and I were high school sweethearts. We've been with each other for 29 years. And Ruben is 25 years old, graduate of Boston College.
This was Ruben III?
The third.
Okay.
God got it right the third time. Third is charm. And he's doing programming coding in the city of New York.
Cool.
Moved out of the house a couple of years ago. Ryan is our baby. He's 23. And Ryan just graduated a couple of weeks ago from Temple University. But he was also commissioned, because he did Army ROTC, as a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army. So we're very proud parents. Ryan is with us now for the summer, but in September he goes to Missouri to the Military Police Academy. He's going to be an MP.
Okay.
Then in January he'll go out to Savannah, Georgia. To Savannah, Georgia. So we're empty nesting and we're having a good time. We're blessed. And for me, you know, having two men that we raised from the Bronx, go to school, stay out of trouble, becoming professionals, respectful. You know, that to me is the most important thing in life. The fact that I can serve in the capacity of either assembly member, borough president, or maybe mayor of the city of New York in the future, that's icing on the cake. That's, you know, it's all a blessing.
You'd be the first Latino mayor.
First Latino mayor.
Yep, that's history.
In a city where we have such a large Latino population.
Yeah.
And you know, I mean, there's obviously an energy out there to do that. But when it's all said and done, like I've been the borough president for every community in the Bronx, I would be a mayor for everyone in the city of New York.
I appreciate you saying that. Thanks a lot, Ruben.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being on, man.
All right. Peace.
There you have it. I'd like to thank Ruben Diaz Jr. for hosting the Morning Stretch team in the Bronx and for being very candid about his political future. You know, his plans to revitalize New York City and Mayor de Blasio. Finally, after 20 years, we have someone who, if he should win, will bring back that New York swagger that we've missed in Gracie Mansion since Mayor Ed Koch. Someone who appears he can relate to all New Yorkers, from the common man to the businessman, from people struggling with the squalor of New York City Housing Authority to middle-class civil service workers. Something New York City has missed badly with the last two mayors, who were tone deaf to the cries and concerns of New Yorkers, real New Yorkers. First, we had a billionaire mayor, and now a mayor who aspires to be a billionaire by selling off our city and all the properties. So what do we think of Ruben Diaz Jr.? I think he's capable in a breath of fresh air, and that's something sorely needed by this city, as the air really stinks right now. So we'd like to send out an invitation to all the politicians who truly want to be of service to all New Yorkers. Come talk to us at the Morning Stretch, and let's see where you stand on the issues that matter most to our viewers. Cuomo, Nixon, Molinaro, James, this invitation is for you. And you too, Mayor de Blasio, you're invited as well. And everyone else who aspires for New York City and New York State office. Because here at the Morning Stretch, we believe in giving our viewers the information they need to make an informed decision. See you next week.